The silence after missions always felt heavier than the battle itself. No gunfire, no static, just the uneven rhythm of breathing, each man lost in his own storm. The dust still clung to their uniforms as they pulled back into the compound, boots dragging over gravel. Some looked at the ground. Others glanced at the horizon like it might still hold danger. And she walked among them quietly, head lowered, voice unused now that it was no longer needed. No one said it aloud, but they all remembered. It wasn't the captain's orders that had carried them through. It wasn't headquarters with its clipped radio calls. It had been her voice, steady, calm, pulled from somewhere deeper than fear. Yet no one stopped to thank her. Soldiers rarely did. They carried gratitude in silence, buried under exhaustion. They dropped their packs, wiped dust from their eyes, checked their rifles with hands that trembled. One by one, they slipped into the tents or leaned against walls, lost in private prayers. She sat on the edge of a broken chair outside the barracks, hands resting on her knees. She stared at the ground, but her mind wasn't there. It was with him, her brother. His face blurred by time but alive again in memory. She could almost hear his laugh, his careless whistle when they were kids running through wheat fields back home. He hadn't been the quiet one. He had been the opposite, always loud, always brash. But when the mission had failed, when the miscommunication had cost him his life, silence had been all that remained. Silence in the knock on the door. Silence in the officer's voice as he read the report. Silence in her mother's grief, a silence so complete it had filled their house until it suffocated her. Now she carried that silence with her, not as a burden, but as armor. The wind shifted. Voices carried faintly from inside the barracks. Someone cursed. Someone laughed, too sharp, masking nerves. She didn't rise, not yet. She needed a moment with her thoughts before the world demanded she speak again. But there was a shadow she hadn't noticed, someone standing nearby, watching. "Your voice," a soldier said quietly. She looked up. It was the youngest one, the boy who had whispered that he didn't want to die. His eyes still carried that raw edge, like he was standing too close to the line between courage and fear. "Back there, when the radio was breaking up, how were you so calm?" She held his gaze, then looked away. "I wasn't," she said softly. He frowned, confused. "You sounded." "Sounding calm isn't the same as being calm," she cut in gently. "Inside, I was as scared as you." He shook his head like he didn't believe her. But he stayed, and she let the silence stretch, giving him space. She knew what he needed wasn't explanation. It was proof that fear didn't disqualify him, that it was possible to feel it and still move forward. He finally nodded, as if her words had been enough. But before he walked away, he muttered, "If you hadn't spoken, I don't think we'd have made it." When he was gone, she let the weight of his words settle. They weren't praise, not really. They were truth, and truth was heavier. She reached into her vest, pulling out the folded letter she always carried. Her brother's handwriting stared back at her, jagged, uneven, ink faded. She didn't need to read it. She had memorized every line. Still, she unfolded it, let her eyes run over the words like a ritual. "If I don't make it back, promise me one thing. Don't let silence take you the way it took me." The irony was sharp. He had meant her grief. He hadn't meant for her to use silence as a shield in war, but promises bend in strange ways. Her hand trembled slightly as she folded it back. She closed her eyes, and in that moment she wasn't a soldier. She was just a sister, a daughter, a woman carrying too many ghosts. That night sleep didn't come easily. It never did after missions. The barracks were thick with restless bodies, the smell of sweat and dust, the groans of men half dreaming, half waking. She lay still, eyes open, listening. At 2 a.m. the call came. Not sirens, not alarms, just a knock at the door and a low voice summoning them to the command tent. She rose, pulling on her boots, brushing dust from her uniform. The others groaned, muttered curses. But when she stepped outside, the air felt different, heavy. Inside the tent, maps were spread again, but this time there was no arguing. The officers' faces were grim. A convoy had gone missing. A supply line critical. Communications had cut out hours ago. Her chest tightened. Again, always communications, always silence where there should have been words. The captain pointed to the map. We send a team at first light, find the convoy, secure survivors if there are any, bring them home. No one said it, but everyone knew it would be dangerous. Ambushes weren't just possible, they were expected. She listened. She didn't volunteer, she didn't speak. But she felt the weight in the room shift toward her anyway. The others glanced at her, not openly, not enough to be obvious, but enough. She wondered if they even realized it, that they were already waiting for her voice when things went wrong. Back in her bunk, she lay awake until dawn. Her fingers traced the letter inside her vest. She whispered her brother's name into the darkness, and she made a vow, not spoken, not even to herself clearly, but felt. If silence was the enemy, then her voice would not fail. Not again. The convoy's trail led them out at sunrise. The light was harsh, painting the desert in cruel gold. Dust rose with every step, clinging to skin, to lungs. They moved cautiously, rifles up, eyes scanning every ridge. Hours passed, heat bore down, sweat stung, and then signs, a broken crate, a wheel track cutting sharp into the sand. The boy soldier whispered, "We're close." She nodded, but her gut told her something else. The desert was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the thud of boots and the faint crackle of radios. They found the first body before noon. It lay twisted beside a burned-out vehicle, uniform scorched, face unrecognizable. No movement, no survivors here. The captain swore under his breath. Someone kicked the sand. Anger bubbled, grief choked, but she said nothing. She bent, touched the man's dog tag gently, as if acknowledging he had once been alive, once been more than a casualty. Then the radio sputtered, a faint signal, words barely there. "Help, ambush, coordinates." The men looked at each other, startled. Alive. Someone was still alive. The captain barked orders, but the radio was breaking, fading fast. They couldn't make out the full coordinates, just fragments. Her hand went to the transmitter. Her throat tightened. She closed her eyes, listening, not just to the words, but to the rhythm, the pauses, the tone. It was something her brother had taught her once. How to hear what wasn't said, how to fill gaps when communication broke. She opened her eyes. "It's northwest, not far. He's signaling between the static. Follow my lead." No one argued, not this time. They moved. The desert stretched endless, each step thick with dread. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. "Left ridge, watch the sand, stay close, don't break line." And they did, because her calm cut through the fear, because even in silence they believed she heard what they couldn't. They found the survivors hours later, pinned down in a narrow ravine. Smoke rose from burning vehicles, the air sharp with gunpowder. Men huddled low, trapped, their eyes wide with despair. The ambush wasn't over. Shadows moved on the ridges above, watching, waiting. And in that instant, every muscle in her body screamed with the memory of her brother's last mission. Trapped, outnumbered, waiting for help that never came. She gripped her transmitter. Her voice came calm, steady, cutting through the chaos. "Hold, we're here. We'll get you out." The boy soldier looked at her. His eyes no longer asked how she was calm. They asked something else, whether her voice was strong enough to carry them all through. She answered without words. The ravine was a trap. Every instinct screamed it. The broken vehicles scattered across the rocks weren't just the remains of a convoy, they were bait. Survivors had been left alive for a reason. Their enemies wanted rescuers to come running straight into the crosshairs. The captain's jaw tightened. His eyes darted between her and the ridges, calculating risk. The boy soldier gripped his rifle too tightly, knuckles pale against the metal. Someone muttered a curse. Someone else whispered a prayer. She didn't move. She studied the ground, the shadows, the smoke curling upward into a cloudless sky. The silence between gunshots was louder than the shots themselves. Finally, the captain whispered, "We push in fast and hard." But she knew what he didn't see. The positions of the burning vehicles, the deliberate gaps in cover, the way the enemy hadn't fired yet, though they had every advantage. She spoke, her voice low, calm. "If we rush, they'll cut us down. They're waiting." The captain turned to argue, but the men didn't look at him. Their eyes were on her. Even through the sweat and fear, they remembered the last mission, the way her calm had pulled them through. She pointed to the left ridge. "There's a shadow line, narrow. It'll hide movement if we stay low. We flank, then drop smoke here." Her finger tapped the map of rock and sand in her mind. "They'll fire blind. Survivors can break while we cover." Silence. The captain's lips pressed thin. He hated being undermined, but finally he nodded. "Do it." The world compressed into a single breath as they moved. Crawling along the ridge, sand biting at their elbows, sweat dripping into their eyes. She kept her gaze fixed forward, not allowing herself to look down into the ravine, not allowing the sight of the trapped survivors to distract her. She thought of her brother instead, of how he might have been crouched once, waiting for a rescue that never came. She tightened her grip on her rifle. This time, no one would be abandoned. A shot cracked suddenly. The boy soldier froze. Her hand shot out, pressing his shoulder down. "Steady," she whispered. The enemy had seen them. Shadows moved, rifles lifted. She raised her radio, her voice calm as ever. "Smoke now." Grenades hissed, releasing thick plumes of gray. The world blurred, sound muffled, vision fractured into silhouettes. Shouts rang out, confused, scattered. She fired, not wildly, controlled. Every bullet meant to suppress, not waste. Around her, the others followed suit, their panic softened by the steadiness of her commands. "Left flank cover," she called. "Push 2 forward, keep low." Through the smoke, the survivors moved, stumbling from behind wreckage. One man clutched his bleeding arm. Another dragged a comrade too weak to stand. Their eyes, wide with disbelief, locked onto the rescuers above. And in that chaos, something shifted. For a moment, the battlefield wasn't just survival, it was redemption. When the last survivor cleared the ravine, when the final shots rang and silence fell heavy again, she lowered her rifle. Her chest burned, lungs aching, but her voice stayed calm as she gave the all-clear. The survivors collapsed against rocks, gasping, bleeding, alive. One of them, a man with dirt streaked across his face, gripped her wrist when she knelt beside him. His eyes shone with gratitude too raw for words. "You heard me," he rasped. His radio had been broken, his signal faint, but somehow she had heard what others might have missed. She nodded but didn't answer. If she spoke, her voice might crack. They pulled back slowly, burdened by wounded but not broken. The desert stretched endless before them, sun sinking low, painting the world in blood-red hues. The boy soldier walked beside her, rifle slung, lips pressed tight. Finally, he spoke. "You saved them." She shook her head. "We did." But he didn't drop it. "No, if you hadn't," he cut himself off, searching for the right words. "How do you do it? Sound calm when you're not. Hear things no one else does." She wanted to tell him the truth. That calm wasn't a gift, but a weight. That silence wasn't peace, but a battlefield of its own. That every time her voice cut through static, she heard her brother's echo inside it. But she said only, "You'll learn. Fear doesn't mean failure, it just means you're alive enough to care." His eyes flickered. He nodded slowly, as if storing her words away like ammunition. Night fell before they reached camp. Fires crackled, smoke rising into the cold air. Men sat in circles, tending wounds, whispering stories of what they'd seen. Some laughed sharp, brittle laughter to chase off fear. Others stared at the flames, lost in thoughts too heavy to share. She sat apart, polishing her rifle, hands steady though her body ached. Her gaze drifted to the sky, stars scattered across a black canvas. Somewhere beyond them lay home, fields where she and her brother once raced under the sun. She pulled the letter from her vest again, holding it in the firelight. The boy soldier's voice drifted from nearby, telling another about the ravine, about the smoke, about how he thought they were all dead until her voice broke through. She closed her eyes. Her brother's words echoed in memory. "Don't let silence take you." She whispered back, too soft for anyone else to hear. "It hasn't, not yet." But even in the safety of the camp, unease lingered. The enemy had been too calculated, the ambush too precise, the survivors too few. And deep inside she felt it. The mission wasn't over. There was something they hadn't seen, something waiting in the silence still to come. Why did the silence feel heavier after victory than after loss? She sat with her back against the cold wall of the compound, helmet resting beside her, rifle across her knees. Around her, the rescued survivors slept in uneven clusters, bandaged and broken, but alive. That should have been enough. It was. Something gnawed at her, a detail she couldn't shake. The ambush hadn't unfolded the way it should have. The enemy had numbers, position, patience. They could have annihilated the convoy. Instead, they'd left survivors. They'd waited, almost inviting the rescue team in. She had led them out, yes. But what if that was the point? What if survival itself had been a trick? The thought burrowed into her chest like a thorn. A night wind carried across the camp. Canvas tents rustled. Somewhere a man coughed, groaned, fell back into uneasy sleep. She closed her eyes, pretending for a moment that it was nothing but the world breathing. But the silence after was too sharp, too intentional. Her fingers brushed the folded letter at her chest. She didn't need to read it. She whispered the words instead, soft enough that no one else could hear. "If I don't make it back, don't let silence take you." And still it tried. Dawn brought movement. Orders barked. Supplies loaded. The survivors were to be evacuated, escorted out by convoy. Her unit was to stay behind, hold ground until reinforcements arrived. The captain gathered them around the map. His voice was clipped, efficient. "We'll fortify this position. Expect retaliation. They won't leave it at this." She scanned the faces around her. Men exhausted, pale under their helmets, eyes sunken but still burning. The boy soldier looked at her, not the captain, as though waiting for her reaction. Others did too, in subtle glances. She said nothing, but she saw, and so did the captain. His jaw tightened. "Stay sharp," he growled, dismissing them. As the men scattered, she lingered. Her eyes traced the map. Lines of supply, roads stretching into open desert. She leaned closer. "They'll come from the east," she said quietly. The captain's eyes narrowed. "You don't know that." "I hear it," she answered. He didn't ask what she meant. He turned away, muttering, "We'll see." But she did know. It was in the silence of the night before, in the way the wind carried differently, in the way the enemy had left gaps too neat, too obvious. She had learned long ago that silence wasn't empty. It had texture, weight. It told its own story if you listened. The hours crawled. Men dug in, setting sandbags, checking weapons, scanning horizons. The heat bore down like a hammer, sweat soaking through uniforms, dust sticking to skin. She sat at the edge of the compound wall, radio pressed to her ear, not speaking, just listening. Static hummed, rose, broke. Sometimes voices flickered, faint, unintelligible. She closed her eyes, filtering the noise, searching for what others missed. The boy soldier crouched beside her. "You really hear things in that?" "Sometimes," she said. "Like what?" She didn't answer at first. Then patterns, pauses, fear. He frowned. "Fear." She nodded. "You can hear it in silence, the way someone holds their breath, the way they don't answer when they should." He looked at her like she was speaking a language no one had taught him. Maybe she was. By afternoon, the attack came. It started with a distant rumble. Engines, the kind that didn't belong to the desert. Men tensed, rifles rising, eyes scanning the horizon. Then the first explosion. A plume of sand and fire rose on the eastern road. just as she had said. The captain barked orders. Men scrambled to positions. The compound became a storm of motion, boots thudding, radios crackling, shouts echoing. She stayed steady. She pressed her transmitter, her voice cutting through the chaos. North wall, 2 men down, cover them. West tower, shift your angle, you're exposed. Hold the line. Breathe. Her calm threaded into their panic, pulling them back from the edge. The enemy poured from the east, trucks bristling with guns, figures moving through heat haze. Fire lit the horizon, bullets slamming into sandbags, tearing through air. The compound shook with the weight of it. And through it all, her voice, not loud, not commanding, just there. Left, steady, watch your corners, don't break. Men bled, men screamed, men fought, and still they listened. In the lull between volleys, the boy soldier pressed against the wall beside her, chest heaving. His face was pale, lips cracked, but his eyes burned. "I thought I'd die in that ravine," he said between breaths, "but this feels worse." She glanced at him. Dust streaked his face, sweat running into his eyes. He was young, too young for this weight. "Fear doesn't make you weaker," she said softly. "It makes you human." He swallowed hard. "And you don't look afraid." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him the truth, that she was terrified, that every shot carried her back to the day her brother didn't return, that her calm was a mask, and underneath it she was breaking. But the words stuck. Instead, she met his gaze. "I am," she said, "but fear isn't the end, it's just the beginning." He held her eyes, searching for proof. Finally, he nodded. Another explosion shook the ground, cutting off whatever else he might have said. The battle stretched into dusk. Smoke clung to the compound. The air stank of cordite, blood, sweat. Men slumped against walls, gasping, hands shaking. The enemy withdrew for now, shadows melting back into the desert, but everyone knew they'd return. She sat in the dirt, back against the wall, eyes closed for a moment's rest. Her hand found the letter again, fingers tracing the worn edges. Her brother's voice lived in the silence between gunshots, in the pauses between breaths, in the calm she forced into the airwaves. She remembered the last time she had heard him, the night before his final mission. He had joked, as always, but there had been something else under it, a hesitation she hadn't noticed then, a silence she hadn't understood until it was too late. Now every mission felt like a chance to answer him, to fill the silence he had left. When night fell, the camp was a shadow of itself. Fires burned low. Men whispered in fragments. Some prayed, some cursed, some stared into nothing. The captain sat apart, silent, brooding. His authority had frayed, he knew it. The men didn't look to him anymore. They looked to her, not because she was louder, but because she was steady. The boy soldier sat beside her again. His hands shook as he cleaned his rifle. His voice broke when he whispered, "I don't want to be like this forever, always scared." She turned to him. The firelight caught the sharp lines of his face, the exhaustion in his eyes. She thought of herself at his age, her brother alive, the world simpler, fear something distant. "You won't," she said softly. "Fear changes, it becomes something else. You'll carry it. And one day you'll realize it carried you too." He stared at her, as if memorizing the words. Hours later, when the night was deepest and the desert air bit cold, she woke to static. Her radio crackled faintly. Not random noise, not wind, something deliberate, a signal. Her breath caught. She pressed the receiver closer, straining to hear. A voice, faint, broken, almost lost. "They're coming, not east, not again from inside." She froze from inside. Her eyes darted across the camp. Men slept, weapons close, guards packing. But the voice, it had been clear enough. The danger wasn't beyond the walls, it was within them. She rose quietly, heart pounding. For a moment she considered waking the captain. Then she stopped. No, if she was wrong, it would break what little trust remained. If she was right. She gripped her rifle tighter. Her voice for once stayed silent. But not for long. That night the silence of the camp was no longer peace. It was the sharp, heavy silence of betrayal waiting to speak. And she knew when it did, everything would change. Why did silence weigh heavier than the gunfire itself? The team had made it back across the ravine. Bodies ached, breathing burned. The adrenaline that had once kept them sharp now dulled into exhaustion. And yet, she still hadn't spoken a word since the last command that saved them. The radio hissed with static, a reminder, a phantom of her voice. They moved along the valley floor, boots pressing into dust that smelled faintly of metal and blood. The air had shifted, less gunfire now, more wind through barren trees, but no one dared to believe they were safe. Not yet. Hale walked near her, his jaw tight, fists flexing. He had once been the loudest, the angriest, but tonight his fire burned low, smoldering instead of roaring. He glanced at her, his lips parting but words caught in his throat. He looked away. It was Tors who finally broke the silence. "You saved us," he whispered, as though speaking louder would fracture the fragile calm. His words trembled. "If you hadn't, we'd—" She shook her head softly. She didn't want praise, didn't want a spotlight, she only wanted them alive. But beneath that silence, beneath the strength they saw, another truth weighed heavy. The voice they clung to, the calm command that pulled them back from chaos, had cost her something. And no one knew what. Not yet. The valley narrowed into shadow, the moonlight caught in jagged rocks like broken glass. They moved in single file, rifles low, nerves high. The mountain seemed alive. Every echo of their boots came back sharper like a warning. When they reached the choke point, the radio crackled again. A burst of static like a cough in the dark. Hale's hand shot to the earpiece. "Base?" he asked, hope sparking. "Nothing." Another crackle. This time a fragment of words. Copy downlink compromised. Then silence. The team froze. Her eyes narrowed. She knew what this meant. The line wasn't safe anymore. Somewhere someone was listening. "Keep moving," she whispered at last, her first word since the ravine. It startled them, like hearing the earth itself speak after hours of silence. They obeyed without hesitation. But inside, her chest ached, because she hadn't told them the whole truth. The broken comms weren't just a threat to the mission. They were a reminder of something she had buried years ago, another mission, another line that had gone silent. A night when her voice hadn't been enough to bring everyone home. That failure lived inside her still, and tonight it pressed closer step for step. The terrain grew harsher. The path disappeared into boulders and sharp inclines. Tors stumbled, muttering about his knee. Hale caught him, steadying him with a rare gentleness. "Don't fall behind," Hale murmured. "We need you." That word, "we," meant something different now. They weren't just soldiers following orders. They were survivors clinging to one another's weight, one another's flaws. But survival had its price. When they finally broke from the rocks, they saw it, what the enemy had been guarding all along. A compound buried into the mountain like a scar. Faint lights glowed against the dark. Antennas pierced the night sky, a listening post, the very source of the interference. And beyond it she saw movement, vehicles, men, too many. The team crouched, scanning, hearts pounding. "Too many," Tors muttered. Hale cursed under his breath. "We're not equipped for this." But she just stared. Her silence stretched long enough that the others glanced at her, waiting, expecting. She finally exhaled, slow, controlled. "We don't need to fight them all," she said. "We just need one thing." The others exchanged glances, confusion, suspicion. "One thing," Hale pressed. She didn't explain. Not yet. Mystery was her shield. But inside the thought burned, that antenna, the signal, if she could cut it, their comms might return. Their line home might reopen. But the cost of reaching it. Her chest tightened again. Because she knew the cost better than anyone. They would need a diversion, and she had already chosen who it should be. The team didn't know it yet. They shifted, planning routes, whispering strategies. The wind howled, carrying dust and faint voices from the compound below. Tors clenched his jaw. Feels like suicide. Hale growled low, so does waiting here. And in the middle, she knelt in the dirt, drawing rough lines with a stick, her fingers trembling though no one could see. The plan formed piece by piece, dangerous, fragile, and cruel. But necessary. Because sometimes survival wasn't about winning. It was about what you were willing to sacrifice. And she had already made her choice. She looked up at her team, faces lit faintly by moonlight, eyes tired, skin marked with sweat and dust. Each of them carried a story. Tors with the knee injury and the letters from home he never answered. Hale with his anger masking grief no one dared ask about. They were human, fragile, breakable. She swallowed hard. And then she spoke, calm, steady, unshaken. "This is how we get out alive." The words fell into the silence like stones into water. Ripples spread through their faces. They didn't argue, not yet. But inside, as the plan unfolded, she felt the old ghost stirring again. The memory of another team, another mission, another night she had chosen sacrifice. And lost them all. Her voice had returned tonight, but at what cost would it remain? Only the mountain would know. Only silence would answer. What made silence more terrifying than the roar of battle? From their vantage point, the compound seemed to breathe with menace. Searchlights swept across the rocky slopes, carving out white beams in the dark. Figures patrolled in pairs, their movements sharp, mechanical. The sound of a generator throbbed in the distance, its low hum vibrating through the mountain floor. The team crouched behind jagged rocks, each heartbeat louder than the wind. Dust stung their eyes. The bitter smell of oil and damp earth lingered in the air. Tors whispered first, his voice cracking. "That's a fortress, we can't just—" "Quiet," Hale snapped, though his own nerves showed in the tightness of his jaw. But her silence, her stillness, cut through them both. She stared at the antennas rising above the compound like blackened spears against the night. Every instinct in her body screamed, not fear, not yet, something else, something older. This wasn't her first mountain, not her first compound. She could almost hear the echoes of another mission years ago, a different antenna, a different night. The memory clawed at her chest, a mission she had led where the team never returned, where her calm voice had guided them forward and into death. She had buried it for years, buried it beneath silence, beneath discipline, beneath steel. And now the mountain dug it back up. Hale turned to her, his breath sharp. "Say something. You see the same thing we do. Too many men, too many eyes." She didn't answer. She couldn't, not yet. Tors rubbed his knee, the pain twisting his face. "We're not ghosts. They'll see us coming, hear us." Again silence. The weight of it pressed against them until Hale snapped. "You've been the one calling the shots. What's the plan? Or do we just sit here and pray they don't find us?" Her eyes stayed fixed on the compound. Moonlight caught the side of her face, highlighting the dirt streaked across her skin, the exhaustion that pulled at her eyes. Finally, she whispered, "We don't fight them all. We cut the antenna." Hale blinked. Tors frowned. "That's it," Hale spat. "We risk everything to slice through some wires." "It's not just wires," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but her heart pounded. "It's the signal. That's why our comms are dead. That's why base doesn't hear us. We bring that tower down, we open our line home." Tors shifted uneasily. "And if we fail?" She let the silence hang, the question unanswered. Because she knew what failure looked like. She had seen it once before. The mountain seemed to listen as the team weighed her words. Hale muttered under his breath, frustration burning in his eyes, but even he couldn't argue the truth. Without comms, they were stranded, forgotten. Finally, Tors asked the question that mattered most: who goes in? Her chest tightened. This was the choice she had been dreading. She could send them, Hale with his strength, Tors with his steadiness. She could order them into the dark. She could risk their lives for the antenna. But she had already chosen. She knew even before the question was asked. "I do," she whispered. The air froze. Hale shook his head sharply. "No, absolutely not. You think we'll just sit here while you—" "You'll cover me," she interrupted, her voice steady, controlled. "That's the only way this works." Tors swallowed hard. "You won't make it out." Her gaze flicked to him, then back to the compound. "Someone has to." The words carried a weight none of them could shake. Hale cursed low, pressing his fist into the dirt. "You don't get to decide that alone." But she had already decided, long before this night, long before this mountain. It wasn't about leadership. It wasn't about orders. It was about debt, the ghost she carried, the team she had lost years ago because her voice had pushed them forward into fire. This time she would not lead others into death. She would take it herself. Her silence since the ravine hadn't been strength. It had been penance. She adjusted her rifle, checked her sidearm, movements slow and deliberate. Her breath fogged faintly in the cold air. Every sound seemed magnified, the click of her magazine, the scrape of stone beneath her knee. Tors looked away, jaw tight. Hale stared at her like a man watching a storm roll in, powerless to stop it. "You think this is redemption?" Hale's voice was low, almost broken. Her eyes met his, steady calm. "It's survival." He didn't answer, he couldn't. Because deep down, he knew she was right. The plan unfolded in whispers. Hale and Tors would position themselves along the ridge, covering her approach with rifles. She would descend through the rocks, slip into the compound's blind spots, reach the antenna and bring it down, fast, brutal, final. If she was seen. No one spoke of that part. The silence was answer enough. Minutes stretched like hours as they prepared. Tors muttered something about his daughter back home, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in months. Hale rolled his shoulders, his rage barely contained, not at her but at the world that had put them here. And she let their words wash over her. She memorized them, their voices, their small human truths, because she knew she might never hear them again. When the moment came, she moved without hesitation. Down the slope, into the shadows. The rocks cut into her palms. Dust filled her lungs. Every step closer to the compound made her heart beat louder. Searchlights swept. Boots crunched below. Voices carried in a language she didn't know. Her body became the silence. Slow, steady, invisible. She crept to the edge of the outer fence, crouching low, breath caught in her throat. The hum of the generator throbbed through her bones. The antenna loomed above, impossibly tall, impossibly close. One more push. She glanced once toward the ridge. Hale's silhouette faint in the dark, rifle steady. Tors beside him, motionless, waiting. They were watching, trusting, depending. And she knew, if she failed, they would be lost too. The weight of that truth pressed into her chest as she cut through the fence with slow, deliberate movements. The wires snapped softly, lost beneath the howl of the wind. She slipped inside. And for a heartbeat, the silence was absolute. Then, a shout. A voice from the shadows. She froze. The night shattered. What could a single shout do to a mission already hanging by a thread? The voice cut the night like glass, sharp and immediate. For an instant, everything froze, the wind, her breath, the hum of the generator. Then came the pounding of boots, the rattle of weapons. She pressed herself flat against the fence line, the shadows her only shield. Heart hammering, breath locked tight, every muscle coiled. She could feel Hale and Tors watching from the ridge, rifles locked on, waiting for a signal she couldn't give. The guard's flashlight beam swung wide, carving arcs of white across the dirt. It passed inches from her boots. She didn't move, couldn't. The silence inside her was absolute. The man muttered something, his voice low, uncertain. He stepped closer. Her fingers brushed her sidearm, but firing now, one shot would ignite the entire compound. No, not yet. The beam flicked past her again, then drifted away. Footsteps receded. The man cursed softly into the night, convinced he'd only imagined movement. She exhaled, silent, measured. But her chest still ached. The ghost still pressed, because she remembered another night, another mission, when a single shout had been the beginning of the end. Not again. She slid forward into the dark, the antenna looming above her like a skeletal giant. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the mountain itself tried to drag her back. From the ridge, Hale whispered into the comms, voice low, harsh. "You almost burned, you sure you?" Quiet, she cut him off. Calm, steady, the same voice that had steadied them before. He obeyed. She reached the base of the tower. Steel beams rose into the night, groaning softly in the wind. Cables stretched from the generator, feeding the signal into the sky. This close, she could hear it. Not the signal itself, but the hum, the vibration that lived inside the metal. It reminded her of the old radios from her first deployment, the ones that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat when you pressed your ear to them. She set down her pack, hands moving with precise control. Wire cutters, charges, everything she needed to bring the tower down. But even as she worked, she felt the mountain closing in. The shout hadn't gone unanswered. Two guards broke from the far corner of the compound, their boots heavy, rifles slung forward. Their flashlights cut through the dark like blades. Her pulse quickened. She pressed lower to the ground, the tower's shadow covering her by inches. One wrong move, one wrong breath. The beams crept closer. Her earpiece crackled softly. Hale, his voice barely contained fury. "Say the word, we'll drop them." She closed her eyes. The choice tore at her. If Hale and Tors fired, the compound would explode in chaos. Every soldier inside would storm the yard. The mission would end here. But if she stayed silent... The guards passed. She opened her eyes again, breath shallow, hands steady. The silence had saved them once more. Her fingers worked quickly, faster now, clipping wires, placing charges, setting timers. Every click echoed like thunder inside her chest. Sweat traced down her temple, stinging her eyes. She wasn't just fighting the compound, she was fighting herself. The ghosts whispered in her ears. The mission from years ago, the one that had failed. The team that had died because she'd pushed too hard, too fast. This was her chance to rewrite that night, to carry the weight alone instead of letting others fall beneath it. She finished the last connection. The charges were set, 10 minutes, enough time to retreat if luck held. But as she rose, ready to slip back into the shadows, a flashlight beam froze her in place. The guard she'd evaded earlier, he wasn't imagining things anymore. His eyes locked on her figure against the steel. A shout tore through the compound, louder this time, urgent, certain. "Contact!" The night erupted. Rifles snapped up. Floodlights blazed to life, drowning the shadows. Sirens wailed, echoing off the mountain walls. Hale's voice roared through her earpiece. "We're hot, move." She ran. Bullets tore the ground behind her, sparks flying from rock and steel. The air filled with the deafening thunder of gunfire, the choking stench of powder. From the ridge, Hale and Tors opened fire, precise and punishing, their rifles spitting bursts that bought her precious seconds. The compound erupted in chaos, guards scattering, shouting, firing wildly into the dark. She sprinted through it all, lungs burning, heart slamming against her ribs. The fence loomed ahead. The gap she'd cut still open, barely visible in the floodlight's glare. She dove through, rolling hard into the dirt, pain shooting through her shoulder. Dust filled her mouth, bitter and dry. "Hale, Tors," she gasped into the comms. "On you," Hale's voice barked back. Gunfire cracked sharp behind it. They were covering her, risking everything, just as she'd feared. The charges ticked down behind her. The antenna loomed tall, seconds from ruin. And she realized her choice hadn't saved them from danger. It had only delayed it. Her silence wasn't enough, not anymore. She scrambled up the rocks, legs trembling, muscles screaming. Hale's rifle barked overhead, Tor's groaning with effort as he laid down cover. Then came the explosion. A roar split the night, fire blossoming skyward. The antenna shuddered, bent, then collapsed in a screaming wave of steel and sparks. The mountain shook, the compound drowned in flame and debris. For a moment, just one, she thought they had done it. Then the sound came. A new roar, deeper, heavier, engines, tires grinding against stone. From the far side of the valley, headlights appeared. Dozens, enemy reinforcements pouring toward the compound like a tide. Her stomach dropped. They weren't done, not even close. She reached the ridge, collapsing beside Hale and Tor's. Their faces were pale, eyes wide in the glow of the burning tower. "We're not getting out of this," Tor's whispered. Hale clenched his jaw, fury and despair warring inside him. "They'll bury us here." And she just stared at the flames, the wreckage of the tower she'd destroyed, the ghosts of the past mingling with the fire of the present. Her silence trembled, her lips parted. "No," she whispered, so soft they almost didn't hear. Then louder, steadier. "No, we're getting out." Because she had promised herself, never again. She would not lose another team to the mountain. Not tonight. The reinforcements closed in, engines growling like predators in the dark. And the three of them, exhausted, outnumbered, backs to the rock, prepared to face the storm. The night had stretched thin, like a fabric frayed to its breaking point. Every breath of the soldiers was heavy, every movement deliberate, as if the weight of silence itself threatened to crush them. But at the heart of this stillness, she remained, her quiet strength a pillar when even steel had begun to bend. By dawn, the outpost was holding, battered but not broken. Fires smoldered in the distance, ash settling like snowfall over the scarred earth. The wounded had been carried to safety, the dead honored in whispers too soft for the world to hear. Yet inside the fragile calm that followed, the unspoken truth settled over the squad. The fight wasn't finished. It was only waiting. The return of the threat. It was Sergeant Hale who noticed it first. His gaze lingered on the ridgeline beyond the ruined fields, where the early light caught on something unnatural. He whispered into his comms, his tone low but edged with tension. "Movement east flank." The squad tensed. They had learned not to dismiss Hale's instincts. Soon the figures became clear. Shadows advancing against the sunrise, dozens, then scores of them, their armor glinting with menace. The enemy hadn't retreated into the night, they had only regrouped. Panic stirred at the edges of the squad, the kind that claws into a soldier's chest before they can think. Supplies were low, ammunition nearly spent, bodies weary, and now the enemy was coming again, stronger than before. All eyes turned toward her. She didn't flinch. Her face, still streaked with soot and dust, betrayed no fear. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence spoke in ways no command could. She adjusted her rifle strap, stood tall against the morning glare, and simply nodded. It was enough. The squad found their courage mirrored in her restraint. Where others trembled, she was steady. Where others doubted, she was certain. The plan, no one spoke. There was no formal briefing, no grand strategy drawn in sand or barked across the comms. She simply moved, swift, precise, unshakable, and the others fell into place around her. She led them through the remnants of the field, weaving between craters and fallen barricades, every step calculated to conserve energy, every pause an invitation for them to trust her instincts. The truth was clear to all of them. They could not outlast a siege. Their only hope was to turn the field itself into a weapon. She scouted the terrain in silence, her eyes tracing the old irrigation trenches, the fallen structures, the natural choke points where the enemy would funnel their advance. She began setting traps, not with explosives, they had none left, but with ingenuity born from desperation. Wires from broken comm units became trip lines. Shattered panels were tilted to reflect sunlight, creating false signals of movement to confuse the enemy. Even the bodies of fallen machines were repositioned to form crude barricades. Every act was wordless, deliberate, and unshakably calm. And as they worked beside her, the squad began to understand. Silence wasn't emptiness. It was a weapon sharper than steel, capable of carving order from chaos. The enemy's approach. The first rumble came with the earth itself trembling. The enemy was closing in, their formation tight, their steps a rhythm of confidence. To them, the field was already won. They advanced like executioners, not warriors, certain they would find nothing but remnants of a broken defense. But as they crossed the threshold of the ruined irrigation lines, the traps began to spring. A trip wire sent the first rank sprawling into the dirt, confusion sparking like wildfire through their formation. A reflective panel blinded another squad, buying precious seconds as the defenders repositioned. Then came the first ambush. From behind a collapsed structure she opened fire, her rifles cracked sharp and unrelenting. Each shot landed with precision, not wasted in desperation but placed with surgical calm. Her silence had been the warning, her stillness the preparation. Now her voice was the rifle itself. The squad followed, their confidence reignited. They fought not as scattered men and women, but as a single force bound by her quiet command. The weight of the fight. The battle stretched on, each moment pressing harder against their weary bodies. Sweat burned into eyes, muscles screamed, lungs begged for rest. And still the enemy pressed forward. Through it all she did not falter. Her silence became a rhythm they could follow. Where she looked they aimed. Where she moved they advanced. When she crouched they took cover. Words would have slowed them, tangled them in hesitation. Her quiet was faster, sharper, more certain than any spoken command. But even strength has limits. Hale noticed first, the way her hands trembled slightly as she reloaded, the faint stagger in her step. The squad's pillar was not unbreakable. She was human, bloodied and exhausted like the rest of them. And yet she gave nothing to despair. Instead, she drew deeper into her silence, carrying the unbearable weight so no one else had to. The moment of collapse. By midday, the field was choked with smoke and dust once more. The squad was down to their last magazines, their last fragments of strength. The enemy had been slowed, bloodied, but not broken. And now they surged again, their numbers threatening to overwhelm. A rocket screamed overhead, striking the barricade where she stood. The explosion ripped the ground apart, tossing her back against the soil. For a moment the squad froze, horror twisting their faces. Their anchor had fallen. But as the dust cleared, she rose. Her uniform torn, her face bloodied, her breath ragged. Yet she rose. She lifted her rifle again, set her stance, and without a single word pressed forward. The squad erupted with her. Desperation turned into defiance. Fear turned into fury, and together they surged against the tide. The storm breaks. The clash that followed was unlike anything the squad had endured before. It was raw, close, merciless. Rifles cracked until they were empty, then steel met steel, fists met flesh. Through it all she fought, not recklessly, but with the same quiet precision that had guided them all along. Even in the chaos, her silence was the steady beat that kept their hearts from breaking. At last the enemy faltered. Their advance slowed, their confidence shattered by the resistance they had not expected. By dusk, the field was theirs again, not won, not safe, but held. The squad gathered, exhausted beyond words. Bodies ached, wounds throbbed, and still no one spoke. There was nothing to say that could match what had just passed between them. They looked at her standing amid the wreckage, silent and strong. And they understood, medals, honors, speeches, none of them could capture the truth. What had saved them wasn't glory, it wasn't even firepower. It was silence. They had mocked her quiet once, thought her silence weakness, thought her lack of words was absence. But on that battlefield, silence became their shield. It steadied their hands. It anchored their hearts. And though no medal could ever bear its weight, her silence carved a place in history no sound could ever erase. The battlefield finally lay still. Not quiet. No battlefield was ever truly quiet, but still. The smoke had thinned, drifting lazily over broken barricades and shattered earth. The acrid scent of burnt metal and gunpowder clung to the air, mingling with the heavier silence of the fallen. For hours the squad had held, their bodies driven past exhaustion, past reason, past the breaking point. And when at last the enemy withdrew, the ground they stood upon no longer felt like just dirt. It felt like consecrated earth, paid for with sacrifice and silence. She stood at the center of it all. Blood crusted at her brow, her uniform torn, her rifle clutched loosely in hands trembling from fatigue. Her eyes wandered across the wreckage, not to admire, not to boast, but to count, to make sure the living still breathed and the dead were not left nameless. The squad's realization. No one spoke at first. The squad sat in scattered clusters, bandaging wounds, reloading magazines out of habit though none remained, staring at the ground as though afraid to meet each other's eyes. The battle had burned words out of them. But every so often, their gaze drifted back to her. They had seen leaders rise and fall. They had followed men who shouted orders, demanded obedience, forced courage into trembling hearts with volume and fear. But none of those voices had steadied them the way her silence had. It wasn't the absence of words they had followed. It was the strength behind it, the unspoken certainty that someone bore their weight when they no longer could. Hale, his arm wrapped in a bloodied bandage, finally broke the stillness. His voice was hoarse, raw, but resolute. She saved us, not the guns, not the barricades, her. The others nodded, too tired for speeches but too grateful for silence. They knew it was true. The aftermath. The days that followed blurred together. Reinforcements finally arrived, stumbling upon a squad that should have been broken, buried, forgotten, but wasn't. Medics rushed in, stretchers carried the wounded, engineers began clearing the debris. To outsiders, it was just another field reclaimed, another battle fought. But to those who had lived it, the memory would never be just another. It would be the night silence became stronger than war itself. She refused recognition. When officers demanded reports, she offered only the barest facts. When medals were discussed, she stepped aside, allowing her squad to be honored in her place. She neither sought nor accepted the spotlight. But the soldiers who fought beside her carried something more enduring than medals: memory. And memory, unlike ribbons and speeches, never tarnished. The weight she carried. At night, when the tents were pitched and the wounded finally slept, she often sat alone, her rifle beside her, her gaze fixed on the horizon. It was not triumph that weighed on her then, it was loss. Every face that had not returned, every voice that would never speak again. The burden of command, unspoken but heavy, pressed on her shoulders. Her silence had carried them through, but it also carried the ghosts of those who hadn't survived. And that weight was not something any medal could ease. She bore it quietly, as she always had. The squad's gratitude. One evening, days after the battle, the squad gathered around her without speaking. They didn't need to call her over. She was already there, as if drawn by the gravity of their bond. Hale placed something small and rough in her hand. A piece of shattered metal from the battlefield, scorched and twisted, but still whole in its own way. "We don't have medals," he said quietly, "but this is ours. You carried us when we couldn't carry ourselves. We want you to carry this." She didn't reply. She only closed her hand around the fragment. its edges sharp enough to cut, but not enough to make her let go. The silence between them said everything words never could. The echo of silence. Weeks turned to months, and the war dragged on, as wars always do. Battles came and went, victories counted in ground gained and losses buried in soil. But her story spread, not as a tale shouted in parades or written in official records, but as whispers among soldiers in the dark. They called her the Silent One, not a hero in speeches, but a lifeline in memory. When fear gripped a trench, someone would say, "Remember the Silent One, she never broke." When exhaustion threatened to crush them, they whispered, "She carried silence like a shield. We can too." And so her silence began to echo, far beyond that single battlefield, far beyond her single squad. The medal that never was. Eventually, the war's commanders summoned her. They spoke of commendations, of medals, of ceremonies to honor her. They wanted a symbol, someone to point to and say, "Here is what victory looks like." But when they asked her to speak, she gave them the same thing she had given her squad: silence. She looked at them, steady, unblinking, as though daring them to understand that some honors were not theirs to give. They wanted sound bites and speeches. She gave them nothing but the truth. Silence is not weakness. It is strength too deep for words. In the end, they awarded the medal anyway. But it sat in a case, untouched, while the shard of battlefield metal remained in her pocket, real, unpolished, sharp. They mocked her silence once, thought it weakness, thought it absence. But on that battlefield, silence became a weapon, a shield, a strength no metal could measure. She saved lives no speech could honor, carried weight no ribbon could represent. And though history will never write her name in gold, every soldier who walked away that day knew the truth. Some heroes speak, some roar, but the greatest are silent. The camera fades on her figure, dusty, scarred, but unbroken, standing against the horizon, the battlefield behind her, the silence stretching endlessly forward.